And I want to thank those who will be filling in to preach. We are blessed as a church family to have so many here right from among our own church that handle the word with excellence. And certainly one of those is Bill Peters. And Bill is not a stranger to us. He is also the director of our senior adult ministry. And so when you hear of the roundup, you can just think of Bill Peters. You can think of what in his mind might he be envisioning for a golden roundup. He's got such creativity and energy, and so we love Bill, and we always enjoy hearing him preach as well. So would you join me in welcoming Bill Peters as he comes today?
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. That is what a blessing, and it is always a privilege. Really is an honor to preach for Ryan. Looks like he's on vacation, though, doesn't it, with the shirt? But he's not. He's not. My mother-in-law lives right next door to him, so I've turned in one of those Baptists. I keep an eye on the preacher whenever I go around his house. And we had staff meeting the other day, and his car was at his house, so he was there. I'm sure he was working, so that's not in my notes. I don't know why I shared that. But anyway, thank you so much for coming and letting me share with you this morning. The Golden Roundup, wasn't that great to sing about our country today? And I know that we do love our country, and it is it's broken, it's in a mess, but we are thankful that God has, by His grace, and it's only none of us chose to be born here, right? To live here. Some moved here. But anyway, it's God's grace, and we're thankful for the freedoms that we do have. We're going to celebrate all of that Wednesday. Today's the last day to sign up for the Golden Roundup. So you'll want to come. We're going to celebrate our country. And Kristen Trout, and I see her back there, she is a history teacher at Living Water Academy, and she's going to be there and going to share her family. Her dad runs the Civil War Museum at Jefferson Barracks, and so she's going to share about that and about the history of Jefferson Barracks. So it's going to be really good. Hope that you will be there Wednesday. All right. I haven't even started yet. The thing on the left is counting up, and the thing on the right is 8:49. Okay. I wanted to introduce, I am so excited this morning to have my oldest, my firstborn son is here this morning from Alabama. And so I am thankful that he is here with his family. This is Cole, William Cole Peters. I'm William Lawrence. My dad's William Henry. So this is William Cole Peters and his wife, Harley, whose dad is also named William. Cole and Harley, they live in Fort Payne, Alabama. They're both school teachers there at the Fort Payne School District. Cole teaches high school history. Harley, I believe, middle school math, right? And the best part, my two grandsons are here, all right? This is, and y'all have heard me talk about Bo and Luke. This is William Bo Peters, next in line, right? And Lucas, Bo and Luke. And there's a third one here with us. We just can't see her yet. We don't know. We don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but we got Bo and Luke, and so I'm praying for Daisy. Amen? I am. Harley, I got a whole room full of people praying for Daisy, okay? so we were very excited about that, though. So glad that they could be here. They attend New Home Baptist Church down in Pisgah. It's in Pisgah, right? Alabama. And so glad that they could be here. Well, it just falls on me. We're going through Mark, and so we're in Mark chapter 6 this morning. And so I would like to read. They only gave me 6 verses, which is good. I only need 6 verses, but I did squeeze 4 points out of 6 verses, so it's going to be great. Maybe 3.5 points. But let's read. We're going to read through the first 6 verses, and then I want to share with you about Jesus of Nazareth, what God has laid on my heart. So Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 1, it says, he left there, I'm going to stop already, the there is from chapter 5. Remember the very last week, Brother Ryan shared with us about a little girl who was raised, Jairus. And Jairus worked for the synagogue, so probably was in Capernaum. That's where they lived. And so when it says he left there, that means he left Capernaum, which is on the Sea of Galilee, and came to his hometown. And his disciples followed him. That's also interesting because in the previous chapters, it's been a large crowd following him. And this time, it's just his disciples. Verse 2, when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. Where did this man get these things? They said. What is this wisdom that has been given to him? And how are these miracles performed by his hands? Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joses, Judas, and Simon? And aren't his sisters here with us? And so they were offended by him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his household. He was not able to do a miracle there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. And he was going around the villages teaching. So let me share with you this morning about Jesus of Nazareth. And the first point just simply being that Jesus returned to his hometown. He returned to his hometown. Now this is really crazy that this is the passage that I got because I don't have a hometown. No, that's serious. I don't have a hometown. My dad is a Southern Baptist preacher. He's retired now, but never graduated from high school, never graduated from college, and so that means you spend your life in little churches, small Baptist churches. People ask me that all the time, by the way. Where are you from? Some of you have asked me that. Where are you from? I got the cowboy hat on, and I know the boots, and that's a whole nother story. But the truth is, I was born in Hannibal, Missouri. I know, that's odd, isn't it? Hannibal, Missouri, because Mom and Dad were going to school up there at Hannibal LaGrange. Told you he didn't graduate from college, but he did attend. And born in St. Elizabeth's Hospital. I was going to show you a picture of that because it's haunted now. It's like all boarded up. But I wasn't there for very long and moved up to Philadelphia and down to Bolivar and eventually went to kindergarten somewhere outside of Tightwad, Missouri. And I went to 7 schools before I graduated from high school. That's the honest truth. Ballard and Urick, which Brother Ryan is familiar with. That's where his folks live now. El Dorado Springs, a lot around, Bolivar, a lot of family in Bolivar and that area. But eventually ended up in Unionville, Missouri. Not Union, Unionville. It's about 10 miles south of Iowa on Highway 5. And so, seriously, I was driving Uber one time and some guy asked me, where are you from? And I said, I live in Chesterfield. And he said, people don't talk like that in Chesterfield. So I know, I'm just from Missouri. I'm from all over. I don't have a hometown. Jesus, though, he had a hometown. And so that leads us to the setting. And the verse there doesn't give us the name of it. It doesn't say Nazareth. It says hometown. And the word there in the Greek actually for hometown, it's the word patrice or patrita, the feminine. And so patrice, we hear our word from the English, patriot, which means the home where his ancestors are from. This is where his family lives. This is where he grew up. Now, in case you're not up to the story of Jesus, he was born in Bethlehem. That's true. But if you were to go back to Luke chapter 1, when Gabriel, the angel, comes to Mary to tell her that she's going to give birth, guess where he goes? To Nazareth. He goes to Nazareth to tell Mary because that's where she lived. Later on in Luke chapter 2, in the Christmas story, what everybody's familiar with, it says that Joseph and Mary left Nazareth to go to Bethlehem as God ordained it in sovereignty of God, because that fulfilled a prophecy in the Old Testament that he would be born in Bethlehem. So they go to Bethlehem. Then you'll remember, then it's in Matthew, where the wise men come, and after they visit Jesus, then Joseph is warned in a dream that he is to leave, that Herod wants to kill the baby, and so he goes down to Egypt with the family. This is all before Jesus. He's probably maybe 2 years old, just a young boy. They move down to Egypt, and then again, Joseph is told, okay, Herod's dead, safe now, you can go back. And it's in Matthew chapter 2 that it says he took his family back to, not to Bethlehem, because that's not their home, back to Nazareth. And so Nazareth it's an important place, so important it's never even mentioned in the Old Testament. And that's something not even mentioned. It's this small town. If you were to look at a map of Israel, it's about halfway between the southernmost point of the Sea of Galilee. I'm doing that wrong. You're looking at the map this way. Sea of Galilee. No, now I'm doing it wrong. Sea of Galilee over here, Mediterranean Sea over there. The southernmost tip right in the middle is Nazareth. It sits on a hillside. There is a main highway, a Roman highway that would have ran through it, close to it, but you'd have to get off the highway and travel a few miles to go to Nazareth. It's kind of like Unionville, where I went to high school. Nobody travels through Unionville. You have to be on purpose. You have to go there for a reason. That's Nazareth, just a small town, but so important. By the way, in this an interesting insight, there's only one town mentioned on the cross when Jesus is crucified. Pilate had a sign written on it, Jesus of Nazareth. Out of all of those towns mentioned in the Old Testament and all of the promised land, Nazareth, because that's where Jesus was from. But that's part of the problem. Nobody expected anything from Nazareth. That's why when Andrew went to Nathanael and said, hey, we have seen the Messiah, we've found him. And Nathanael's like, where is he from? Andrew says, well, he's from Nazareth. And that's the verse where Nathanael says, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. So nobody expected anything to come from this little town of Nazareth. But that's his hometown. In Mark chapter, I think it's chapter 1, verse 9, where it says that Jesus left Nazareth and went to the Jordan to be baptized by John the Baptist. And interesting enough, it's later in chapter 1, when Jesus cast out the demons out of a person, it was the demons that said, who are you, Jesus of Nazareth? They knew who he was too. They knew that he was Jesus of Nazareth. And so this is his hometown up until maybe the age of 30. So he knew this town, knew it very well. They knew him. That's all part of this story here. They knew him very well. He had family that lived there. But let's talk about next. That's the setting. So another interesting thing we learn in this little story is his skill. It says that he's a carpenter. Now, if you've been around church for any time, you know that we always talk about Jesus as the carpenter, right? Did you realize this is the only story that it says that? This is the only place that even talks about Joseph being a carpenter. This story is found here in Mark chapter 6, and then the same story told by Matthew in his gospel over in Matthew 13. And it's only here that it says, this is the carpenter, Jesus. Now, over in Matthew, he says, isn't this the carpenter's son? And so the people there, when Jesus spoke at the synagogue, they're probably saying both of these things. Wait a minute, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this Jesus? So really interesting that this is the place we learn this about Jesus. There again, that word carpenter, I think it's the Greek word tektron, and you can hear the beginning of that word tect in the last part of our word architect. And so it really could mean, the emphasis is building things. He built things. Now, the early fathers, they thought that, they believed, or maybe they had some other evidence that it was wood. So that'd be a carpenter building doors and plows and chairs and those kind of things. But he could have worked with stone. He could have helped build buildings. He was a builder. Isn't that incredible? That the Bible says, it says in John chapter 1, verse 3, that all things were made through him, and without him wasn't anything made. The one who created all of the universe shows up, and God loves shepherds, but he didn't show up as a shepherd, did he? He didn't show up as a king. He shows up as a builder, a creator. That's what his nature was. And so he's there in Joseph's house. And by the way, in this text, which is an insight to his home, Joseph isn't mentioned here. Joseph isn't mentioned at all, which leads many to believe that maybe Joseph had already died by this point. Maybe he was no longer there, and this may be one of the reasons why Jesus hung around until the age of 30, because he's supporting Mary and the family, and so he was working there. He had learned his father's trade, and he is a carpenter. And then that leads us to his family. It leads us to his siblings, which is another interesting thing about this passage. This is the only place in the New Testament, this in Matthew 13, where Jesus' brothers are named, where they're actually named. There in the text, the names of his brothers is James and Joses and Judas and Simon, four brothers that are named, and then it says, and his sisters. Now, we won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but in other churches or other churches, there's a whole thought about Mary being a virgin, an eternal virgin, always pure. And so there's this belief that she didn't have any other children. She only had Jesus and remained pure after that, right? And so how do they explain this then, these four brothers? Well, some people say that these are half-brothers. They're Joseph's, not Mary's children. So they're from some other marriage or, that Joseph had. Or maybe they're cousins. We know that he had cousins. And so those are some of the things that are used to explain this. But let's just, if you'll remember, I remember because I listen. If you remember last year on Mother's Day, 2023, Pastor Ryan preached a message on Mary, the mother of Jesus. I remember that because I preached about Joseph on Father's Day last year. And so anyway, but he preached about her. And one of the things we can know for certain is that Mary did not have to maintain her virginity or her purity, if you will, in order to be Jesus' mother. Mary was a woman just like all other women. She was a human being. She was special in that she was chosen by God to be a servant. But we don't need to believe that, then she didn't have any other children. And the best thing to do is just take the Bible, what it says here. These are his brothers. So Jesus is her firstborn, born of a virgin, critical, something that is essential to our Christian belief, that he is a new Adam. He is all God and all man in the flesh, right? So he was born of a virgin, but then after him, Mary and Joseph surely had other children there in the house. They were married and raised a family as other people would do. Would totally make sense in that culture that Joseph would have sons, would have children who could help with the business and help provide. And so we have the setting, the skill, and the siblings. Jesus returns to his hometown. But now we get to the meat of the story. What happens is that Jesus is rejected by his own people. Rejected by his own people. Look what it says there in verse 2. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue. Now, we've seen this already many times in the Gospel of Mark, that Jesus, when he would go to these towns, he would go to the synagogue. That was, I think he enjoyed that. Not just part of his mission, but I think that there was, because he's the Son of God, there's this hunger, this desire to be among God's people and to be in a place where the Bible is taught, where the scriptures are read and taught. And so, just like everywhere else, he goes to the synagogue. By the way, Nazareth is a small town, but big enough that it does have a synagogue there. Now, this is, by the way, the second time that Jesus went there and spoke. The first time, Luke tells us in Luke chapter 4, In Luke chapter 4, after Jesus' baptism, after his temptation in the wilderness, he goes to his hometown. He goes to Nazareth. This is before he has any disciples, so it's just him. He hasn't called any of his disciples. And it's in Luke chapter 4 that he goes to the synagogue, and they ask him to speak. And he gets up and he teaches, and it's there that he reads from the prophet Isaiah. And he reads about the Messiah coming. And that's where he says, this has been fulfilled now in your sight. Made him so mad. The first time he went there and did that, you can read about Luke chapter 4, made him so mad that they chased him out of town, remember Nazareth is on a hillside, chased him up the hill to a pinnacle, and were about to, the Bible says they were going to throw him off of a cliff. That's really angry, by the way, when the town, don't go there, don't go there. I've been run out of town, that's all I'll say. But when people, it's another reason why I don't have a hometown. My dad's been run out of town. But anyway, we're in good company. They ran Jesus out of town. But they were trying to get rid of him, right? And it says there in Luke chapter 4 that he just kind of disappeared. He walked through them. It was like they got up there and they're like, where did he go? And because it wasn't time for him to die, right? So that was the very beginning. And they've already rejected him. So now he comes back. Few months, maybe a year. We don't know exactly the amount of time, but he's been doing all of these teachings in synagogues, and he's called his disciples. Now he's got his followers. He's done miracles, incredible miracles, and now it's time to go back to Nazareth. By the way, this will be the last time recorded in scriptures that he goes back. Why back to Nazareth? Well, one thing, because his mom lives there. Hello? I mean, his family lives there, and so he's going back to see them. But, you know, another great thing, remember Pastor Ryan just, was that last or 2 weeks ago when he was preaching about the demon-possessed man who was full of legion, remember? And Jesus cast the demons out into pigs and to swine. And it was in that story when this man now clean and whole and saved, and he says, I want to follow you, I want to go with you. Remember what Jesus told him? No, you need to go back to your hometown. Go back home and tell them the good news. And Jesus, one of the beautiful things about God is he never asks you to do something that he wasn't willing to do himself. And he knows how hard it is back at home. He's already done this. He was so excited, went there the first time, and they ran him out of town. But he does exactly what he told that man to do, and what he would expect of all of us. Start at home. Remember in the Great Commission that's there in Acts, when he tells them, you'll be filled with the Spirit. Acts 1:8, right? And he says, and it'll begin where? In Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria to the uttermost parts of the world. So start in Jerusalem, start at home. He started at home. He gives them another chance, and he goes back home to share with them. And he gets up, and he is teaching there in the synagogue. Now, when he's teaching, look what happens. First of all, they're astonished with him, aren't they? They are astonished. It says there, they start asking these questions. He began to teach in the synagogue there in verse 2, and many who heard him were astonished. Where did this man get these things? So they're talking about his teaching. How did he know all of this? Remember, they know him. They know him from school. And these are, some of them who are asking these questions are the leaders at the synagogue there, right? And so they're asking, wait a minute. We didn't teach him these things. Man, that's pride, isn't it? I didn't teach him that. Did you teach him that, Joe? No. Where is he getting all of this stuff, all of this information, right? Where is he getting these things? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? And how are these miracles performed by his hands? Now, you know what's really interesting there is that, and people who refuse to believe in Jesus, even atheists, you ever notice they'll do this? By questioning his wisdom and his power, you know what they're saying? They're admitting he's got wisdom and power. You ever notice that? I read one time about they were building a bridge down in Florida, an overpass, and they had a priest come out, a Catholic priest, to bless this new bridge. And so this was many, many years ago, by the way. Anyway, he comes out and he blesses this bridge, with holy water and says some kind of a blessing and prayer over it. And the next day, a group of atheists showed up with a water hose, and they hosed the whole thing down. Like, we got to get rid of that. But by doing that, they're admitting something's happening there. Something is going on. They're admitting he's got wisdom. This is different from anything else that we have heard. They're admitting he's got power. He's doing these miracles. And so they're astonished by what they know. They can see these things. They can hear these things. And so they're witnesses to this. They're astonished by what they know. But then look what it says. It says, performed by his hands. Then in verse 3, isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary? Now, by the way, that surely was, you have to hear the tone of how they're saying this, don't you? The son of Mary. Joseph is not mentioned here. I think Mark, and a lot of times when you study the book of Mark will he's pretty blunt. One reason why it's the shortest book, everything just this happened. So he's blunt, and he doesn't try to cover this up any at all. They didn't say anything about Joseph. Now, in their culture, you wouldn't be known as the son of a woman. Your dad, that's who's mentioned. You are William Peters. After William, I just had to throw that in. But they said he's the son of Mary. Now remember, these people know him. They remember when he was born, and they know she was pregnant, and they had not been married yet. This is that illegitimate child. This is a slur. They're saying, who is this guy? There's all these rumors about him all the time. And then they mention his brothers there. By the way, out of those brothers that are mentioned, we know that James, he's mentioned again in the New Testament, by the way, in the book of Acts several times, in some of Paul's letters. And then also, we believe he's the one that wrote the book of James. And then there's Judas is there. And Judas probably is Jude, another brother that we believe wrote the small New Testament book of Jude, little letter of Jude, okay? So they know his brothers, they know his family, and then it says, this is an incredible thing, his brothers, his sisters are here with us, and it says they were offended. They were offended by him. Offended by him. They were astonished at the things that they knew, but you know what? They were offended because of what they didn't know or refused to know and refused to believe, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he is God manifested, God in the flesh, the incarnation of God. They refused to believe that. He already told them that the first time, didn't he? In Luke chapter 4, he said, I'm the Messiah. This has been fulfilled now in your sight. So they knew what he was saying, and they were offended by it, and they refused to believe it. And my friends, that is where we are in our country today, isn't it? How people, they were so familiar with him, and they heard what he said, and they made a choice, and they chose, I'm not believing that. I don't believe that for 1 minute, that he really is God in the flesh. And so then they take offense at him. They're angry. They are upset with him. They are offended by him. Well, so what was his response then? What is Jesus' response? He says then in verse 4, Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his household. So he makes an acknowledgement here, and this is one that we know even from life today, that a prophet is not without honor in his own household. We, on the last day of school, Living Water Academy, I teach there, by the way, the 6th grade Bible class part-time, and so on the last day, we took the middle school over to, I think it's called Sky Zone, trampoline place over on on Manchester. And while we were there, not boasting, maybe but I was the one. I'm looking at this guy sitting on a couch, and I'm talking to Jeff Stewart, we're just kind of visiting, and all of a sudden I said, I think that's Paul Goldschmidt sitting over there. Some of you could be like my wife, who I love very, very dearly, and when I told her this story, she was like, who's Paul Goldschmidt? So for those of you, God love you, God bless you, but he is last year's most valuable player, first baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals, all right? He was there. We're there with all the middle school from Living Water Academy and several, and all of a sudden, I can't help myself. Jeff's like, that's not him. Pulls up a picture. He's like, oh, maybe it is, I knew. And I'm like telling all the other people, right? But we're being adults. We're not going to bother him until suddenly one of the kids recognized him, one of the boys, I think. And all of a sudden, there they went, all these kids from our school. He was so nice. He took pictures and selfies with them. I didn't ask for his picture. I did shake his hand at the very end just to tell him thank you, I told Jeff I was offering as a pastor to lay hands on him. I did not do that. Didn't want to offend him, but anyway, but he was there. He was there with his children. He was just playing. It was so fun to watch because you know what? To his kids, he was just dad. He's just dad. And to everybody else who is more distant from him, this is Paul Goldschmidt. It's my friend Paul, by the way. Paul Goldschmidt. And I met him. And so, but in your own home, this is one of the truths about life, is that the people in your home, they know you better than anybody else. And a prophet is without honor in his own home. That just means, you know what? You may be the most valuable player for the St. Louis Cardinals, but it's your day to take the kids to Sky Zone. You have to do your responsibilities, right? He does. Yeah, I could see it. He must be a good dad. So all those things that dads do, changing diapers. Oh, my Lord, I cannot believe, God, that you put that in my life again. But I've been doing that twice yesterday. It stunk, but you do that stuff. It doesn't matter who you are. That's what it is as a parent, right? It's without honor at home, okay? That's just the way it is. So he makes an acknowledgement. I'll say more about that in just a minute. But then, secondly, there's an allotment. Now, this is a interesting part of this story because it says he could not do a miracle there. He was not able to do a miracle there. And that's exactly what it says. He was not able to do that. And so what in the world is going on? Because Jesus is God, and he is omnipotent, he is sovereign, he can do anything that he wants to do. We back that up with all kinds of scripture, but now he can't do something? Why is that? Why can't he do a miracle there? I believe what's going on here, I believe it is like a parent. It's like a parent that tells a child, if you disobey, if you don't do this, let's say I always use the cookie illustration. If you eat that cookie before dinner, you won't get any dinner, right? And you'll just go straight to your room to bed. That might have happened to me. Maybe that's why that comes up so often. But you know what happens if you're a parent, and if you make a rule, you have to follow through with that. Otherwise, you're not as just. You're not the parent that you should be, right? And so, if you say that, then you have to follow through with that. The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11, it says, "Without faith, it is impossible to please God." They did not believe. He can't do anything there. It's kind of like that's his rule. I want to. Oh, he's got eyes of compassion. He loves. He is so long-suffering and patient. This is the second time they ran him out of town. He wants to help them. He loves them. He's going to die on a cross for them, but he can't do anything. Why? They don't believe. They simply just do not believe. There is no faith there. And so it's by his own limit. It's by his own rule, if you will, as a parent, his own discipline that I can't do anything except, and this is a great part of the story, he is God. He is all powerful. And it says there, except that he healed a few sick people, right? What is that all about? Well, maybe there were some. The Bible always talks about a remnant. Maybe there's a few there. They believe. They're like, I don't care what everybody else says, Jesus, I believe in you, and he healed them. Maybe it's people with disabilities, right? People who, they don't even understand. He is a righteous God. He always does the right thing. And so he does have power, and he was able to heal some, but he couldn't do a miracle there. So there's an allotment based on their response, based on their faith. And then there's an amazement. And it says there that he was amazed at their unbelief. He was amazed at their unbelief. There's twice in the Gospels that Jesus is amazed himself. One time is with a centurion. There's a centurion soldier who was a Gentile, and he came to Jesus, and he had a servant who was sick, and he said, Jesus, I need you could you please heal my servant? And Jesus was going to go home with him, and then the centurion says, no, you don't even have to go home. I understand, because I'm an officer in the army. I understand what it is to just make a commandment. You can just say the word here and he'll be fine. I believe that. That amazed Jesus. And he said, I haven't found faith like that anywhere else. In a Gentile, he's the person that shouldn't understand this. People in Nazareth, they're the ones that should get it. He grew up there. They have been taught the word. They are God's people, the Jews. They should have understood. Jesus is amazed when a Gentile has faith, and he's amazed when the people that grew up with him, why are you offended? He never did anything wrong. They're not offended because, he was the kid that was spray painting his name up on the water tower, right? You don't do that in Wildwood and Chesterfield, but in small towns, he wasn't that kid that was always causing trouble or anything. Again, they were offended just because of who he said that he was Son of God. And so there's this amazement by Jesus. And then the last point, the final one, this is just really a half point. It says at the end in verse 6b, it says that then he went, it's the second half of the verse, he was going around the villages teaching. Actually, we'll leave that for Pastor Tim next week, because sometimes the commentaries, that's actually included with the next passage. But what that means is he didn't take it, how do I say this? He didn't really take it personally that they rejected him. He just knocked the dust off of his feet because he's still on mission. He's got a job to do, and he went on to the next place, to the next town, in order to share the good news. And in fact, next week, that's what we're going to hear. That's part of the advice that he told his disciples. When you go into a town and they reject you, just knock. Jesus did not come to condemn the world. That's what he says in John chapter 3. He's going to come back one day as a judge, but not this time. This time it is to serve, to give himself, to die on a cross. And so knock the dust off your feet if they reject you, and you move on and share with those who are ready to receive. All of this reminds me of John chapter 1. I think it's in verse 10. John chapter 1, verse 10, where the gospel says he was in the world, and the world was created through him, and yet the world did not recognize him. He came unto his own. This story of Nazareth is just an illustration, an example of the full gospel. He came unto his own. He created us, and his own people received him not. The people that he created, that he loved, the people of Israel that he called, that he blessed, that he gave them this promised land, these incredible leaders and kings. He came into his own, and his own people received him not. But, and that's the gospel, but to those who did receive him, to those who did believe in his name, meaning who believe that he is who he says that he is. Yes, he's Jesus of Nazareth, but he is God's Son. He's the Messiah. He is Jesus Christ, the promised one. To those who believe in his name, he gave the right to be called children of God. Remember previously in Mark, when his family came, they thought he was nuts. It doesn't mention his brothers by name, but Mary and her children, they show up and they're like, we got to take you home. You're embarrassing us. And that's where Jesus looked around and says, who is my family? Those who receive him, who believe in his name, he gives the right to be called children of God, who are born not of blood. Let's see, I'm reading this up here. Give the right to be children of God to those who believe in his name, who were born not of natural descent or not of blood, not of the flesh. You can't become a Christian just because you were born into a Christian family, right? Nor of the will of the flesh. In other words, you can't, I'm running out of time. Seventh-day Adventists just left a pamphlet on my door yesterday. That's incredible. I've had Presbyterians and Seventh-day Adventists leave stuff on my door, inviting me to church. Anyway, I read their stuff, and should have been preparing for this, but I couldn't help it. I read this little pamphlet, and they were saying that you have to obey the 10 Commandments. That's, by the way, why they worship on the Sabbath day, because you have to obey the 10 Commandments and believe, right? But you can't do it by your own flesh. You can't say, I'm going to do this. You can't do it by the will of your flesh. Not of who you're born to, not of the will of flesh, nor the will of man. It's not you. You are not in charge, but of God. But of God. That's it. That's it. Who receive him, believe in his name. He gives the right to become children of God. All right, I am out of time, so let me share with you my actionable, I can never remember this, Ryan, I'm sorry. Insights. AI, that's what I'm thinking. That's a totally different thing, but AI. So what do we learn from this really quickly? First of all, you need to spend more time with Jesus and get to know who he really is. They spent time with him, but they didn't really get to know him, did they? They think they know him. There's a phrase, familiarity breeds contempt. Don't be like that. Oh, that's so possible in churches. It's happening to our country. My goodness, we were so blessed. God has called incredible preachers and teachers in this country. We have sent out more missionaries around this world than anybody else. And yet it's just so familiar that it is getting cold and dead, isn't it? Everywhere we look. You need to spend time with Jesus. A student in our church asked me if I had the book Knowing God by J.I. Packer. I was embarrassed to say, I don't have that. I've heard of that and don't have it. And so this is the way I am. I bought a book for him and I bought one for myself, thinking, you know what, I really should read that. I've always heard about it. Not knowing that I was going to end up preaching on Knowing God. It's a great book, by the way. You should do stuff like that. Read, spend time with him, pray, get in his word, find out who he really is, so you can answer that question. I know what everybody else says, but who do you say that I am? So spend more time with Jesus. Get to know who he really is. Secondly, do not be offended when God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. They were offended because who do you think you are? Did you know, by the way, there's a great sermon on this. Adrian Rogers, love him. He's one of my heroes in the faith. And he does a sermon. You can Google it on YouTube. I'll explain to you later what that is. But YouTube, you can look that up. Do you have a grudge with God? You just Google that. Do you have a grudge with God? Adrian Rogers. And he gives 4 reasons why people get offended at God. And one of the reasons why is because, why did you bless him and not me? That's part of what they're thinking there in Nazareth. Wait a minute, we know you. Why? Who do you think that you are? You know, you never get, I was not offended at my friend Paul when I saw him. I mean, I barely know him. I wasn't offended by him that he drives a big, I don't know what he drives, but I think I picked it out in the parking lot, right? I mean, it surely was that car, right? You don't get offended by that. But you know who you will get offended by? When you go to somebody, this is Adrian Rogers, by the way, when you go to somebody else's house that works with your husband and they've got more stuff, and then you're like, wait a minute, this all comes from the same place. How come you've got more than I've got, right? When it's closer to home, in family, don't be offended when God blesses other people or when God uses just ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Third, I would tell you, live an authentic life of faith so your family can see Jesus in you. I have said this so many times, I believe it with all my heart. You can fool a lot of people about your faith, but you will never fool your children. They know, or your grandchildren. They know. They see what's going on. They know you better than anybody else. Be authentic in front of them. Live an authentic life in front of them. Now, it doesn't always work. I will tell you that from my own experience. And here's Jesus. And he never did anything wrong. And they still rejected him. This story hits home, doesn't it? Because it can be so hard. He tells us to take the gospel to our own homes, and it can be so hard because people get too familiar with us. And who do you think you are? You self-righteous individual. You think you're better than us. That's that same attitude. And Jesus experienced that. So know that you are not alone. But just be authentic. That doesn't mean you can change your ways. That doesn't mean that you got to lower your standards. You just be authentic and follow Jesus. His disciples, they didn't reject. They followed him to Nazareth, right? And then the last thing, my last point here, believe that all things are possible with God. Don't ever put God in a box. The Bible says we have not because we ask not, because we believe not. Think about this. Think about this. The last miracle we just heard about last week was a little girl who had died. And Jairus, he believed. And he went to Jesus, and Jesus came to his house and raised a little girl. And I thought about that. I thought, how many little girls there in Nazareth didn't get rescued, didn't get saved, because mom and dad didn't believe? That'll hit home. How many? Because mom and dad didn't believe. Believe. Doesn't mean you listen to that offended sermon, because a little later on, we're going to learn about John the Baptist. He got offended at Jesus. Why am I sitting here in prison? How come you're not? Doesn't mean just because you do believe and have faith that God's going to answer everything the way that you want it to be answered. Remember, it's not about you. But nothing will happen without faith, without belief. Just believe. Don't put him in a box. Don't say, this is too small for you, God, or you can't handle it. Just believe. Just believe.